I discovered the reason behind the alien woman's hatred for me, and I was stunned. The stars stretched across the viewport like scattered diamonds on black velvet, and Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood there watching them with tired eyes that had seen too many battles and too many losses in his 32 years of life. He ran a hand through his dark brown hair and sighed deeply as the weight of command pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden that never seemed to lift no matter how many successful missions they completed or how many lives they saved. The human vessel Starbound cruised through the neutral zone between human-controlled space and the territory of the Valdrani Empire, which was a powerful alien civilization. That had been humanity's reluctant ally for the past 3 years since the war with the Kreth Horde had begun. Jake had been assigned to work with a Valdrani officer as part of the cultural exchange program that both governments hoped would strengthen their alliance and build trust between two species that had almost gone to war with each other just 5 years earlier. That Valdrani officer was Commander Lyra, and she was the most frustrating, confusing, and captivating being Jake had ever encountered in his entire career. She was tall, standing nearly 6.5 feet with skin that shimmered like polished silver under the ship's lighting, and her eyes were a deep violet color that seemed to glow with an inner light when she was angry, which was most of the time she was around him. Her hair was long and white, flowing down her back like liquid moonlight, and she moved with a grace that made even simple walking look like some kind of elegant dance. But what struck Jake most about Lyra was not her otherworldly beauty, but the burning hatred he saw in those violet eyes every single time she looked at him. From the moment she had stepped aboard the Starbound 6 months ago, she had made it clear that working with him was the last thing she wanted to do in the universe. She followed orders perfectly, never missed a duty shift, and performed her tasks with flawless precision. But there was always that cold, distant fury radiating from her whenever Jake was near. He had tried everything to break through that wall of ice between them. He had been professional and courteous, giving her space and respecting her boundaries. He had been friendly, offering to share meals and learn about her culture. He had been direct, asking her outright if he had done something to offend her. Nothing worked. Lyra remained polite but frigid, responding to his questions with short-clipped answers and avoiding him whenever possible. The rest of the crew had noticed the tension, and it was affecting morale. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Amy Chen, had pulled him aside just yesterday to express concern about how Lyra's obvious dislike of their captain was creating an uncomfortable atmosphere on the bridge. Jake knew she was right, but he had no idea what to do about it. He turned away from the viewport and headed toward his quarters, deciding that another sleepless night of reviewing mission reports was better than standing here dwelling on problems he couldn't solve. As he walked through the corridors, nodding to crew members who passed him, he found his thoughts drifting back to Lyra, despite his best efforts. There was something about her that drew him in, even though she clearly wanted nothing to do with him. Maybe it was the challenge of it, the puzzle of why she hated him so much. Or maybe it was something deeper, something he didn't want to examine too closely because it would complicate an already complicated situation. He reached his quarters, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The room was spartanly furnished, just a bed, a desk with a computer terminal, and a few personal items scattered around, including a photo of his sister back on Earth and a model of the first ship he had ever served on. Jake sat down at his desk and pulled up the mission brief for tomorrow's assignment. They were scheduled to investigate a distress signal from a research station on the edge of Valdrani space. It should be routine. But Jake had learned long ago that routine often turned into anything. But when you were this far from home, a chime at his door interrupted his reading. "Come in," he called out, expecting Amy or maybe Lieutenant Paul Grant, the ship's chief engineer. The door opened and Lyra stepped inside. Jake nearly fell out of his chair in surprise. In 6 months, she had never once come to his quarters voluntarily. She stood just inside the doorway, her posture rigid and formal, with her hands clasped behind her back in the military stance her people favored. "Commander Morrison," she said, and her voice was like music played on crystal instruments, beautiful. But cold Commander Jake replied carefully, standing up to face her. "What can I do for you? We need to talk," she said. And there was something different in her tone, something he couldn't quite identify as this about tomorrow's mission. He asked, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then moved to the chair with that same fluid grace. She sat down but remained on the edge of the seat as if ready to bolt at any second. "This is not about the mission," she said quietly. "This is about something far more personal and far more complicated than anything involving our duties." Jake sat back down, feeling his pulse quicken with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm listening." Lyra looked down at her hands, which were now folded in her lap. The silvery skin of her fingers seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim lighting of his quarters. For several long seconds she said, "Nothing," and Jake waited, letting her gather her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You asked me once why I seemed to hate you," she said. "You asked if you had done something to offend me, or if there was some cultural misunderstanding between us." Jake nodded, remembering that conversation from 3 months ago when he had finally worked up the courage to confront her directly. "I remember," he said, "you told me there was no misunderstanding, and that I should focus on my duties." "That was not entirely truthful," she said, and now she looked up at him with those violet eyes that seemed to burn with an intensity he had never seen before. "I did not lie to you exactly, but I did not tell you the complete truth, either." "Why?" not Jake asked, leaning forward. Lyra drew in a deep breath, and when she spoke again there was pain in her voice. "Because the truth is shameful to me," she said. "Because among my people, what I feel is considered a weakness and a dishonor to my family and my name." Jake felt confusion wash over him. "What you feel?" he repeated. "I don't understand." Lyra stood up abruptly and began pacing back and forth in the small space of his quarters. Her movements were agitated, almost frantic, which was so unlike her usual controlled demeanor that Jake felt genuine alarm. "Commander Morrison." "Jake," she said, suddenly stopping to face him. "Do you know anything about Valdrani bonding customs?" "A little," Jake admitted. "I know that your people form deep connections with chosen partners and that these bonds are considered sacred." Lyra laughed, but it was a bitter sound, without any humor. "Sacred," she repeated. "Yes, that is one way to describe them." She resumed her pacing. "Among my people, when we encounter someone who could be a potential bondmate, we experience what is called the recognition. It is an instinctive reaction that happens at the biological level. Our bodies recognize compatibility before our minds can process it. The recognition manifests as an intense pull toward the other person, an overwhelming desire to be near them, to know them, to protect them." Jake listened carefully, beginning to understand but not quite believing where this conversation was heading. For most Valdrani, the recognition happens with another. Valdrani, Lyra continued. "It is rare but not unheard of for it to happen across species, but when it does, it creates a difficult situation. Our society values purity of bloodlines and strength of heritage. A bond with an outsider, especially with a human, is seen as a betrayal of our people and our traditions." She stopped pacing again and turned to look directly at Jake. "I experienced the recognition with you the moment I stepped aboard this vessel," she said quietly. "The instant I saw you standing there. In the docking bay welcoming me to your ship, I felt it like a physical force pulling me toward you." Jake's breath caught in his throat. He stared at Lyra, unable to form words. Lyra continued speaking, and now there were tears forming in her violet eyes, though she blinked them away fiercely. "I have spent 6 months fighting this feeling," she said. 6 months hating myself for experiencing it, and hating you for being the cause of it. I have been cold and distant because every moment I spend near you makes the recognition stronger. Every time you smile at me or try to be kind to me, it becomes harder to resist the pull. Every time I hear your voice or catch your scent, it takes all of my willpower not to give in to what my body is telling me I need." Jake finally found his voice. "Lyra," he said, standing up. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I am ashamed," she said. And now the tears did fall streaming down her silver cheeks like liquid starlight. "Because I am a Valdrani warrior from a proud family with a lineage that stretches back thousands of years. Because bonding with a human with you would mean losing everything I have ever known. My family would disown me. My people would see me as tainted. I would be cast out and marked as an outcast for the rest of my life." She turned away from him, her shoulders shaking. But the recognition does not care about any of that. She said, it does not care about my honor or my family or my future. It only cares that I have found my match, and it demands that I act on it. The pain in Lyra's voice cut through Jake like a knife. He moved around the desk, slowly approaching her but keeping some distance between them. Lyra, he said gently, look at me. She turned slowly, and the anguish on her face made Jake's heart ache. I am so sorry, she whispered. I am sorry for being cruel to you when you have done nothing wrong. I am sorry for making these months difficult, when you have only ever tried to be kind. I am sorry for hating you, when what I really hate is this impossible situation. Jake took another step closer. You don't have to apologize, he said. I can't imagine how hard this has been for you. You do not understand. Lyra said, shaking her head. The recognition is not just some passing attraction that will fade with time. It is permanent. For the rest of my life, I will feel this pull toward you. Even if I return to Valdrani space, even if I never see you again, I will spend every day fighting against the need to be with you. It will consume me slowly until there is nothing left. Is there no way, Jake started to ask, but Lyra cut him off. There is one way, she said quietly. If the bond is completed, if both parties acknowledge the recognition and accept it, then the pain stops. The pull becomes something manageable, something beautiful, instead of something that tears you apart from the inside, but that would require you to feel the same way, and even if you did, it would mean I must choose between you and everything I have ever known. Jake stood there looking at this proud, strong warrior woman who was falling apart in front of him because of something neither of them had chosen or asked for. He thought about the past 6 months, about how he had been drawn to her despite her coldness. He thought about how he had noticed everything about her, the way she moved, the sound of her voice, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. He thought about how he had gone to sleep thinking about her and woken up doing the same. And he realized with sudden clarity that maybe the recognition wasn't as one-sided. As Lyra thought, I don't know anything about Valdrani biology or bonding customs, Jake said slowly. But I do know that from the moment you arrived, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I told myself it was just frustration, because I couldn't figure out why you disliked me. But if I'm honest with myself, it was more than that. Lyra's eyes widened. Jake Morrison, she breathed. I'm not saying I understand what you're experiencing. He continued, and am not going to pretend. I know what the right answer is here, but I do know that these past 6 months have been torture for me too, just in a different way. Watching you and wanting to get to know you and feeling like there was this wall between us that I could never climb over. Lyra took a step toward him and then stopped herself. You cannot mean this, she said. You cannot understand what you would be accepting. The bond between Valdrani is for life. It is not something that can be broken or undone. If we were to complete the recognition, it would tie us together forever. Would that really be so terrible? Jake asked quietly. Lyra stared at him. Your career, she said. Your family. Your future. All of it would be complicated by bonding with an alien. My people would see you as the one who corrupted me. Your people might see you as a traitor for forming such an intimate connection with someone from another species. Jake smiled slightly. I think you're underestimating humans, he said. We're pretty adaptable. And as for my career, well, I've never been one to let protocol get in the way of doing what feels right. That is madness, Lyra said. But there was hope creeping into her voice. We barely know each other. Then let's change that, Jake said, taking another step closer. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your home planet and your family. Tell me what you love and what you fear. Tell me everything. Lyra shook her head, but she was smiling now, even through her tears. You are either the bravest human I have ever met or the most foolish, she said. Maybe both, Jake admitted, but I meant what I said. These past 6 months have been hell because I could feel there was something between us, even if I didn't understand what it was. If what you're describing is real, then maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe the universe or fate or whatever you want to call it knows something. We don't. Lyra's smile faded and she looked serious again. If we do this, she said, if I allow myself to complete the bond with you, there will be consequences. My government will be displeased. There may be those among my people who seek to challenge me or hurt you because of what I have chosen. The alliance between our peoples is still fragile, and this could cause problems." "I know," Jake said, "but running from this hasn't made it any easier." "Has it?" Lyra shook her head slowly. "No," she admitted, "every day has been harder than the last. The recognition grows stronger with time, not weaker. Soon I will not be able to function properly. I will become distracted, dangerous to myself and others. That is why I finally came to you tonight. I had to tell you the truth before it was too late." Jake closed the remaining distance between them until he was standing directly in front of her. He could feel the heat radiating from her silver skin and see the way her violet eyes seemed to glow brighter as he drew near. "Lyra," he said softly, "what do we need to do to complete the bond?" Lyra reached out slowly and placed her hand against his chest right over his heart. He could feel the warmth of her palm through his uniform and the way her fingers trembled slightly. "We must acknowledge the recognition aloud," she said. "We must accept each other as bondmates willingly and without reservation." And then she hesitated. And then Jake prompted. "And then we must seal the bond physically," she said, and a pale blush colored her silver cheeks. "It does not have to be immediate, but it must happen within the next cycle of your planet's moon, or the recognition will begin to cause physical pain." Jake covered her hand with his own. "One step at a time," he said. Lyra looked up at him searchingly. "You truly want this?" she asked, "even knowing what it will cost? Even knowing what it might cost?" Jake corrected. "We don't know how people will react. Maybe it will be difficult. Maybe there will be challenges, but Lyra, I have spent my entire adult life in space exploring the unknown. This is just another kind of exploration." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than pain. "I do not deserve your kindness," she whispered. Jake shook his head. "You deserve everything," he said. Then he took a deep breath. "So how do we do this?" Lyra straightened her shoulders, and her expression became formal, almost ceremonial. She kept her hand pressed against his heart and placed her other hand on his shoulder. "Say the words after me," she instructed. "I acknowledge the recognition. I acknowledge the recognition." Jake repeated, "I accept you as my bondmate. I accept you as my bondmate. I give myself to you willingly and without reservation. I give myself to you willingly and without reservation," Jake said, and he meant every word. As he spoke the last syllable, something extraordinary happened. Lyra gasped, and her eyes flared with brilliant violet light. Jake felt a sudden rush of sensation like electricity running through his veins, but it wasn't painful. It was warm and comforting and overwhelming all at once. He could feel Lyra, not just her hand on his chest, but her presence in his mind. He could sense her emotions, the relief, the joy, the lingering fear, all of it flowing into him like water. "Is this?" Jake started to ask, but Lyra cut him off with a laugh. "Yes," she said, and her voice sounded different, somehow richer and more resonant. "This is the bond. You can feel me, and I can feel you. It will grow stronger over time, but this is the beginning." Jake stood there marveling at the sensation. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He could feel Lyra's heartbeat synchronizing with his own, and he could sense the deep well of strength and honor that lay at her core. But he could also feel her vulnerability, the fear she had carried for 6 months and the relief that was now flooding through her. "Lyra," he breathed, "this is incredible." She smiled at him, and it was the first genuine smile he had ever seen on her face. It transformed her, making her seem younger and lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Welcome to my life, bondmate," she said softly. Then more seriously she added, "We should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Have a mission to complete, and then we will need to inform both our governments about what has happened." "I know," Jake said reluctantly, "but for tonight, can we just—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Stay," she said, understanding. "Yes, I do not want to be alone tonight either." She moved to the small couch against the wall and sat down. Jake joined her, keeping a respectful distance between them, even though every instinct was screaming at him to pull her close. They sat in comfortable silence, for a while just enjoying the newfound connection between them. Finally, Jake spoke. "Tell me about your home," he said. "What is Valdreni like?" Lyra's eyes took on a distant look. "It is beautiful," she said. "The cities are built from crystal that reflects the light of our 3 suns, creating rainbows everywhere you look. The forests are silver, like my skin, and the oceans glow with bioluminescent creatures that look like swimming stars." She continued describing her world, and Jake listened, fascinated not just by her words, but by the emotions he could feel through the bond. He could sense her love for her home planet and her sadness at the thought that she might never be fully welcome there again. When she finished, he told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests, about the single sun and single moon. He told her about his sister who was studying medicine and his parents who had been terrified when he joined the Space Force, but who supported him anyway. They talked for hours, trading stories and learning about each other, and through it all, the bond between them grew stronger and more solid by the time exhaustion finally caught up with them both. The sun had set and risen again outside. The viewport Lyra had fallen asleep with her head resting on Jake's shoulder, and he had dozed off with his arm around her. When the morning alarm sounded, they both jerked awake. Jake looked at Lyra, whose hair was tousled and whose eyes were still heavy with sleep. She looked beautiful and vulnerable, and nothing like the cold, distant warrior who had stepped aboard his ship 6 months ago. "Ready for the next adventure?" he asked with a smile. Lyra smiled back. "With you," she said. "I am ready for anything." They stood up together and prepared to face whatever challenges awaited them, the mission, the reactions of their respective governments, the difficulties that would inevitably come from being a human and Valdreni bonded pair. But none of it seemed as daunting now that they faced it together. As they left his quarters and headed toward the bridge, Jake felt the bond humming between them like a living thing. He could sense Lyra's determination, her strength, and her love, and he knew without a doubt that no matter what happened, they would face it as one. The distress call from the research station had come in during the night, while they slept. The situation had escalated from routine investigation to urgent rescue mission. As Jake and Lyra stepped onto the bridge, the crew turned to look at them. Jake could see the surprise on their faces as they noticed the change in Lyra. She was standing closer to him than she ever had before, and there was a warmth in her expression when she looked at him that had been completely absent. Just yesterday, Amy was the first to speak. "Captain," she said with barely concealed curiosity. "Commander." "Lyra, good morning." Jake glanced at Lyra and felt her silent agreement through the bond. They would have to address this eventually, and there was no point in hiding it. "We have something to tell you all," he said. "But first let's deal with the emergency." "What's the situation?" Amy seemed torn between pressing for information and following orders. Professional training won out. "The research station has been attacked by what appears to be a Kreth raiding party," she reported. "They have hostages and are demanding that we withdraw from the system." "How many hostages?" Jake asked, moving to his command chair. 23, Amy said. "All human researchers. The Kreth are threatening to execute them if we don't comply within 6 hours. Jake felt anger rise in him, but also a strange new confidence. He could feel Lyra's tactical mind working through the bond, analyzing the situation and formulating strategies. "What are our options?" he asked. Amy brought up a holographic display of the station. "We could attempt a direct assault, but the station layout favors the defenders. We could try negotiation, but the Kreth rarely keep their word, or we could attempt an infiltration using the maintenance tunnels, but that would be risky." "I have a suggestion," Lyra said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm and authoritative. "The Kreth fear Valdreni warriors. If I were to approach under a flag of truce claiming to represent both our governments, I could get close enough to assess their defenses. Then we could coordinate an assault from multiple angles using the information I gather. That puts you at tremendous risk." Jake said. Lyra met his eyes. "I am willing to take that risk," she said aloud. And through the bond, she added, "Trust me, bondmate. I know what I am doing." Jake nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, "but you're not going alone. I'll come with you as your human counterpart." Together we represent the Alliance. Amy looked between them with growing understanding. Sir, she said carefully. Is there something different about you two today? Yes, Jake said simply. But, well, explain later. Right now we have people to save. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Jake and Lyra worked together seamlessly, and the crew noticed. Where before there had been awkward tension, there was now perfect coordination. They seemed to anticipate each other's thoughts and moves, which was exactly what was happening through the bond. When they boarded the shuttle that would take them to the research station, Jake felt nervous but not afraid. He had Lyra's strength flowing through, the bond supporting him, and she had his determination backing her. They approached the station slowly, broadcasting their peaceful intentions. The Kreth allowed them to dock, but immediately surrounded them with weapons drawn. Jake and Lyra stepped out, together presenting a united front. Take us to your commander, Lyra said in flawless Kreth. We are here to negotiate. The Kreth soldiers seemed unsettled by her presence. Valdrani had a reputation as fierce warriors, and even hardened Kreth raiders gave them respect. They were led through the station, and Jake used the opportunity to mentally map out the layout. He could feel Lyra doing the same thing, cataloging weak points and potential escape routes. The Kreth commander was a massive creature with 4 arms and scaled skin. He sat in what had been the station's command center, surrounded by captured human researchers who looked terrified. You come to beg for their lives? He growled in heavily accented standard language. We come to offer you a chance to leave with your lives, Jake said firmly. You are surrounded. Our ship has superior firepower. Release the hostages and we allow you to withdraw. The Kreth commander laughed. Your ship could destroy this station, but then your people die too, he said. You have no leverage, human. That is where you are wrong, Lyra said. Coldly, you see my bondmate and I represent something new. An alliance between humans and Valdrani that is stronger than you can imagine. And if you harm any of these people, we will personally hunt you down to the last member of your raiding party. There was steel in her voice that made even the Kreth commander pause. Through the bond, Jake felt Lyra's plan forming, and he prepared himself. On her signal, they moved. Lyra was faster than the Kreth expected. She disarmed the nearest guard and used his weapon to shoot out the lights, plunging the room into darkness. Jake had already marked the positions of all the hostages, and he moved by memory and instinct, grabbing the nearest researcher and pulling them toward the door. Through the bond, he could track Lyra's position as she fought. She was a whirlwind of motion, taking down guards with brutal efficiency. Jake activated his communicator. Amy. Now, he shouted. The Starbound launched its assault precisely as planned. Breaching teams came through the maintenance tunnels while fighters provided covering fire. The Kreth were caught between multiple forces and their formation collapsed. Within minutes, the situation was under control. All the hostages were rescued and the Kreth commander was in custody. Jake and Lyra stood together in the aftermath, both breathing hard from the adrenaline and exertion. That was impressive, Amy said, appearing beside them. Also completely insane, but impressive. Jake grinned. Couldn't have done it without my partner, he said, and he put his arm around Lyra's shoulders. She leaned into him naturally, and several crew members' eyes widened. Okay, Amy said. Now you definitely need to explain what happened between yesterday and today. Jake and Lyra exchanged a look. We formed a life bond, Jake said simply. Lyra and I are bonded mates now. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Amy smiled. Well, she said, that explains a lot. Congratulations, you two. The return journey to the Starbound was filled with questions from curious crew members. Jake and Lyra answered as best they could, explaining the Valdrani recognition and what it meant for them. The reactions were mixed, but mostly positive. Most of the crew seemed happy for their captain and their Valdrani officer. But Jake knew the real challenges were still to come. When they reached the ship, there were already messages waiting from both Earth Command and the Valdrani High Council. Both governments wanted explanations. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra faced inquiry after inquiry. They explained, the bond repeatedly defending their choice and their relationship. The human government was surprisingly understanding. There was precedent for cross-species relationships, and while it was unusual, it wasn't forbidden. The Valdrani government was less. Accepting Lyra's family formally disowned her as she had predicted. Several high-ranking officials called for her to be stripped of rank and sent home in disgrace. But there were also voices of support younger Valdrani, who believed their society needed to evolve and adapt progressive leaders who saw the bond as a symbol of the alliance between their peoples. And eventually, after weeks of debate and discussion, both governments reluctantly accepted the situation. Jake and Lyra were allowed to continue. Serving together on the Starbound through it all, they supported each other. The bond between them grew deeper and stronger with each passing day. Jake learned to sense Lyra's moods and needs without words. Lyra learned to appreciate Jake's humor and optimism. Even in difficult situations, they faced prejudice and resistance from some quarters. There were those who saw their bond as unnatural or wrong, but they also found unexpected allies and friends. And slowly they built a life together that honored both their cultures. 6 months after the rescue mission, Jake stood once again at the viewport watching the stars, but this time Lyra stood beside him, her hand in his. "Do you regret it?" Jake asked quietly, "Bonding with me. Losing your family." Lyra turned to look at him with those beautiful violet eyes. "Never," she said firmly. "You are my family now. You and this crew and the life we are building together. I have lost some things, yes, but I have gained so much more." Jake squeezed her hand. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he had said it aloud, though she had felt it through the bond for weeks. Lyra smiled. "I love you too," she said, "my bondmate, my partner, my everything." They stood together watching the stars and dreaming of the future. Whatever challenges came, they would face them as one, united by a bond that had started with hatred, born from fear and shame, but had transformed into the deepest love either of them had ever known. And Jake realized that sometimes the universe did know what it was doing. Sometimes the most unlikely connections were the ones that changed everything. He had discovered the reason behind Lyra's hatred, and he had been stunned. But what stunned him even more was the love that had been hiding underneath it, all along waiting for the courage to break free.